In a political climate that has become very polarized, and Americans are increasingly questioning what news source they can trust, few rise above the muddy waters like C-SPAN. C-SPAN is not a traditional media news outlet, but it provides a unique perspective on what occurs in Washington, D.C. and other governments across the country and world. In this video, we'll explore the history of C-SPAN and whether its biases have evolved over the years. The Cable Satellite Public Affairs Network, better known as C-SPAN, was founded on March 19, 1979. It was a time when cable television was becoming mainstream in the United States and a rapidly growing industry. Brian Lamb, a former journalist and then Washington, D.C. bureau chief of the cable television company Cablevision, founded the network with the vision of bringing gavel-to-gavel, unfiltered coverage of U.S. congressional sessions. C-SPAN wanted to bring the workings of the U.S. Congress into Americans' living rooms. However, unlike other news networks, they did not want to edit or provide commentary to congressional sessions. They wanted the coverage to be as open and transparent as possible without any spin. Its impartial and balanced coverage is independent of federal or taxpayer dollars. The first C-SPAN broadcast was in March of 1979, and it was a floor session in the United States House of Representatives.
On this historic day, the House of Representatives opens its proceedings for the first time to televised coverage.
The first speaker, C-SPAN televised, was Congressman and future Vice President and Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore. Gore spoke about C-SPAN's beginnings and how he believed it would make Americans more confident and trustworthy in their government. Another aspect of C-SPAN that separated it from its competitors was that it allowed the audience to call into its show to voice their opinions on any topic. The first call-in was on October 7, 1980, which featured multiple journalists discussing the 1980 election. When C-SPAN launched, its audience reached approximately 3 million Americans and primarily broadcasted House floor debates and votes. In September 1982, C-SPAN expanded to 24 hours of programming a day, which allowed for more coverage of campaign events, congressional hearings, White House events, press conferences, and interviews. C-SPAN regularly interviewed political figures from high-profile office holders to news correspondents. For example, here's an interview with the then mayor of San Francisco and future U.S. Senator Dianne Feinstein.
That relationship you established as mayor, how has that carried over into recent years?
It has carried over.
The host asked a variety of questions without any political spin, and the audience could call in and ask questions as well. C-SPAN allowed anyone, regardless of political party or where they lived, to join the discussion. In 1986, the United States Senate voted to allow televised coverage on its proceedings, and with that came the introduction of C-SPAN 2. During the first televised Senate session on June 2, 1986, then Senate Majority Leader Bob Dole acknowledged C-SPAN and remarked that it would hopefully make the Senate a more efficient body. C-SPAN continued to expand its coverage of the federal government and add new programs at the turn of the century. Their daily call-in sessions morphed into the Washington Journal in 1995, which currently airs every morning for 3 hours. When they cover the news, they frequently cite and read off news articles. For example, in a news segment on the 2024 Republican presidential primary, they read the front page of USA Today where the race stood entering the South Carolina Republican primary. They then showed a clip from a recent campaign rally for Nikki Haley, where she made her case against frontrunner Donald Trump. C-SPAN then aired Trump's comments on Haley from a Fox News town hall the night before. Most segments allow callers from all sides of the political spectrum to share their thoughts on the pressing issues of the day. However, sometimes they limit it to only Democrats, Republicans, or Independents, depending on the subject. In the aforementioned example, C-SPAN only wanted Republican viewers to share their thoughts on Nikki Haley's staying in the Republican presidential primary, despite having no realistic path to victory. In 1997, C-SPAN expanded to radio with C-SPAN Radio, which provides the same coverage as their main channels, but in radio format. 4 years later, they added C-SPAN 3 to provide additional coverage of public affairs events. Their unbiased and balanced coverage never changed during their boom period. In 1998, they added Book TV, a weekend program on C-SPAN 2 that features discussions on authors and nonfiction literature. Such interviews are typically 1 to 2 hours in length and go in-depth on the author's life and book. One example is a 2020 interview with future Maryland Governor Wes Moore about his book, 5 Days: The Fiery Reckoning of an American City. Moore discussed his life in the military, his Rhodes Scholarship experience, the state of black communities in inner cities, and his perspective on Baltimore following the city's 2015 protests and unrest. The interviewer kept his questions simple and straightforward. C-SPAN has also expanded to podcasts. Many provide history lectures or bring historical context to today's pressing issues. For example, a recent episode on their podcast, The Weekly, touched on whether President Joe Biden would address immigration at his upcoming State of the Union address. They then featured clips from over the previous half-century of addresses, where presidents from both parties mentioned immigration and the need to reform the system. A 2009 survey from Hart Research Associates found that approximately 1 in 5 Americans with cable TV, or 39 million Americans, watched C-SPAN weekly. Its viewership was fairly split between Democrats and Republicans, geographically diverse, and virtually everyone had voted in the 2008 election. These findings indicate that Americans greatly trust C-SPAN for coverage on the day-to-day operations of the federal government. According to Biasly, C-SPAN falls squarely in the middle when it comes to media bias. Its bias score is rated as center. For more information on Biasly's rating on C-SPAN and other media sources, check out biasly.com.